I'm Michelle Singer from the Kellogg-Hubbard Library. I'm the Adult Programs and Outreach Coordinator, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight together. It's lovely to be in community. We're here to hear Writing and Climate Change with Geza Tatrallyay. He's been concerned about environment and climate change all his life, and many of his novels are set against the backdrop of critical environmental issues. Born in Budapest, Hungary, and now living in Barnard, Vermont, Geza studied at Harvard, Oxford, and LSE, and has worked in government, international finance, and as an environmental entrepreneur, in addition to authoring 14 books. And that tiny little bio leaves out one of my favorite facts about Geza, which is he's an Olympic fencer, or was an Olympic fencer. So I hope that comes up in some way, because that's one of my favorite factoids. But Geza, it's lovely to have you here tonight, and I'm going to hand it over to you for Writing and Climate Change.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Michelle. And I'm sorry, I didn't intend to talk about fencing this time around, but I can certainly add a bit on the end if you like, in the discussion period. And also thanks to the library for hosting this presentation on writing and climate change, and to all of you for joining us. And hopefully, as Michelle says, we'll have a chance for questions and discussion at the end. So I'm really delighted to have this opportunity, since much of my writing, especially more recently, has focused on climate change and what we are doing to the world around us, to other species, and to ourselves. As I see it, this is the single most important issue confronting mankind today, and it is the one that preoccupies me most of the time. So this is why it has become the central topic for my writing. My interest in and concern for the environment owes much to my mentor at Harvard, Roger Revelle, who sponsored me to major in what was then, and in the mid-60s, early 70s, a totally new subject, human ecology. Professor Revelle was one of the first to point to the dangers to our survival of burning fossil fuels, the greenhouse effect, and climate change, already way back then. Indeed, some of you may remember that he was also Al Gore's mentor, and the former vice president paid tribute to the professor in his 2006 movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And this was all shortly after the publication of two seminal books that sparked environmental activism at the time: Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring and Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, both of which influenced my thinking. Unfortunately, this era of environmentalism came to an end with the oil crisis in the 70s, when the fossil fuel industry gained the upper hand. In retrospect, this has cost us slightly more than 50 years of moving in the right direction. I had the occasion during my first two summers at college in the late 60s to work as a field assistant for the Geological Survey of Canada up in the Arctic. And this was when I first started to focus on the environment in earnest. I saw how rapidly even just a few weeks of warmth during the summer changed the Arctic environment, melted the permafrost, and allowed plants to blossom, black flies and mosquitoes to rage. The rapidity of this change astounded me. So my abiding interest in the Arctic stems from this time, and my continued research along the way underscores how important the Arctic and the Antarctic, so both poles, are for the Earth and its and our well-being. It was for this reason that I started writing my first thriller, Arctic Meltdown. And although I had been writing poetry most of my life, since high school, in 2011, this became my first serious attempt to get a work published. The novel is set against the background of the melting of the polar ice cap and the gap for resources and trade routes by especially the superpowers that the open seas up there would most certainly enable. Much of the focus in the book is on Greenland, where already then huge blocks of ice, 1/4 times the size of Manhattan, were breaking off some of the glaciers. We were living in Uruguay at the time, and it was difficult to find a publisher from there. So after many unsuccessful attempts, I finally self-published Arctic Meltdown as an ebook via Smashwords. I just wanted to get it out there to bring attention to the environmental disaster and the potential for conflict that a warming Arctic would entail. Since then, of course, the situation has only worsened. For example, there are now reports that in the Antarctic, an ice shelf holding back the Thwaites Glacier is close to disintegration, which could result in anywhere between 2 and 10 feet of sea level rise in the space of a few years, 5 to 10 years, much more and much faster than previously thought. My concern has only therefore increased. So I updated and further edited a second edition of Arctic Meltdown and convinced my thriller publisher, Black Opal Books, to bring out both a paperback and an ebook edition just recently in the August of 2021, 10 years after the very first edition. Since then, I've also worked with a narrator to produce an audiobook. And I'm currently working on a sequel, Arctic Inferno, which I hope to get published in the latter part of this year. So my 4 other thrillers, the 3 books of the Twisted trilogy, Twisted Reasons, Twisted Traffic, and Twisted Fates, and the standalone Rainbow Vintner, all have an environmental subplot or theme to them as well. The trilogy concerns itself with how easy it could be for terrorists to get their hands on stray nuclear material from the Siberian sites where the Soviet Union, under Stalin, developed its version of the atomic bomb. I did substantial research to build the background for these novels and discovered the extent to which several serious accidents there in the 50s and 60s ravaged large tracts of the Russian environment. The damage persists to this day, as do the consequent health issues in the region, such as much higher rates of cancers of all kinds, deformed births, etc. In fact, just to quote directly from Twisted Reasons, where I bring in some of this research, a Norwegian government study concluded that the Mayak nuclear production facility, which is only one of 13 or more such sites, spewed out more than twice as much radiation into the environment as Chernobyl and all the world's atmospheric bombs taken together. People living in the Chelyabinsk region were twice as likely to get leukemia as those living anywhere else in Russia. More than 50% of the childbearing population in the area was sterile. So this is incredible what happened there. And this is not climate change, obviously, but it is similarly devastating for the environment and human and other forms of life. In Rainbow Vintner, my standalone novel about a right-wing coup in France, one of the subplots is the sinking of the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior in 1985 in Auckland, New Zealand, where 2 French divers placed mines on the boat's hull to blow it up, since it was there in the South Pacific, to protest against the French nuclear testing program. That's perhaps small beer compared to, but certainly emblematic of how in this country and elsewhere, environmentalism had to and still has to fight against entrenched interests to make any headway. So much for my thrillers, and I see that there are quite a few poets here, so now I will turn to my poetry, and I have also been tackling climate change from different angles through this genre. And I find it to be an easier one for portraying one's feelings about a subject: anger, frustration, wonderment, gratitude, hope, and clearly more immediate, both in terms of expression and gratification. My poems tend to be succinct, ranging from haiku to maybe 30 lines at most. And I just love painting the beauty of the world and the species of life in it, or the devastation we are wreaking on it and our fellow forms of life, with just a few brushstrokes or words. So out of my 4 published collections of poetry, the last 2, Extinction, published in 2019 by PRA Publishing, a wonderful little publisher of poetry in Georgia, and Extinction Rebellion, published by Cyberwit in 2020. Cyberwit is a publisher of poetry based in India. As the titles of these books suggest, they mostly deal with different deal from different perspectives with the beauty of our world and what climate change is doing to it and the species of life it has nurtured. I was really honored that two great Vermont poets wrote the forewords for these volumes. For Extinction, it was the late Peter Fox-Smith, a friend who was perhaps more known in the opera world, but who, in my view, was a poet of enormous talent. And for Extinction Rebellion, George Longenecker, who's here with us, I'm glad to say, the past president of the Poetry Society of Vermont, also a tremendous poet and friend. Besides these two poetry collections, my fifth volume, Poems for Our World, which I'm currently in the process of submitting to publishers, focuses on the same issues of climate change and environmental degradation. So to some of my poems now. And those who have looked at some of my collections will find that my interest in the Arctic also infuses some of my writing in this genre. So I'll start with a couple of poems from Extinction. And first, I'll read a poem called Melting Polar Ice Cap. In the pristine air of Greenland, the squeaky crunch of my footsteps on the glacier's crisp surface ice ends with the sloshing of wet slush. While in more inhabited lands, the soft footfall of city shoes on concrete sidewalks or walkways metamorphoses overnight to mad splashing as floodwaters invade parks, streets, and foundations, destroying communal living, not just here, but everywhere. But the science is clear, my friend. Ice melts when heat accumulates and is ensnared by CO2. Mankind just spews out this foul gas by still burning fossil fuels, unmindful of consequences. The irony, a refusal to change our depraved way of life, will force us to change how we live as we all scramble to survive this utter vile devastation we managed to bring on ourselves. So next, a couple of haiku. And I know haiku don't have titles, shouldn't have titles, but I usually extract a phrase or a couple of words from the little poem to identify them as they're put into a volume with other poems. So this one I've dubbed Calving Glaciers. Glaciers calve like cows, but these children too all die, like we who strew filth. And another one, which I call Polar Ice Cap. Let's hear this. The polar ice cap is thawing into the sea. Turn on the AC. And there's a little bit of irony in there, as you can detect. And two poems now from Extinction Rebellion. One which is called Polar Vortex. It's also short, but not a haiku. Polar Vortex. A blinding blizzard blows. The polar vortex split. Snow and ice rule the world. When will spring come again? And one which was inspired by a report in early December 2019, so a couple of years ago, about 60 polar bears. And they were reported to have descended on a village in Russia's remote Chukotka region called Rhinoceros in search of food because the sea ice was too thin for them to pursue their usual hunt. So here's the poem called Polar Bears. Climate change warms the atmosphere. The Arctic polar ice cap melts and vainly struggles to reform. Polar bears visit villages along the Siberian coast. Famished, they forage for food scraps, dig up corpses of walruses. They cannot go out on the ice to hunt for ringed seals and sea hares. They are wasted, their babies die, their habitat destroyed by man. How long before they go extinct? And now from Extinction, I'd like to read a few poems that depict the devastation of our consumption-focused lifestyle is causing to the world around us. And the very first poem in this volume is called Witching Hour, which I'll read. Is this the witching hour, the turning point, when the simmering seas boil, spill across the cauldron's brim to flood this verdant earth? Corpses of frogs and fish, seals and birds, our detritus, plastics, and rotting hulls wash up with the silt to bury my feet. Is this the witching hour, the turning point, when wildfires spread, raging across the land and consume forests and fields, roads and towns, killing with burning heat and acrid smoke all life they find in homes or barns or nests, or frantically fleeing the fated end? Is this the witching hour, the turning point? We know damn well it is, but do nothing. We continue our hedonistic lives, complicit in destroying our one earth. We lived in Europe for many years and traveled often to our favorite place, Italy. And you're all familiar with Venice, no doubt, and the fact that it is going under some problems because of flooding. And here's a poem I wrote about that. Venice under siege. Oh, Serenissima, what have we done? You, city of water, are under siege. 7-storied tour boats crowd your canals, puking city loads of eager tourists doing you're doing Europe in 10-day package tours, leaving their detritus for you to drink. We spew gases into the atmosphere that melt glaciers and cause the seas to rise, flooding canals, caggi, and piazzas, eroding the footings of your palazzos. Most serene queen of the Adriatic, is your poignant crumbling a harbinger of our relentless march to extinction? And now, I guess, to the crux of the problem, and that is there are too many of us on this earth, and that's what this poem is entitled. There are too many of us on this earth. There are too many of us on this earth, far too many consuming human beasts who exploit and squander its resources. Self-centered, ignorant creatures who cause then deny catastrophic climate change. Some even feign concern, but do nothing. Our leaders promote Gaia's abuse. We all pursue our lives at her expense. But now our tormented planet fights back. Drought desiccates the soil, killing our crops. Wildfires burn forests and threaten our towns. Ice melts and the seas surge, swamping our shores. A virulent virus wipes out the old. Our social fabric frayed and tears apart. We fight among ourselves for living space, for food and clean water, breathable air. As in every war, casualties mount. Flora and fauna species are wiped out, and humankind too faces extinction. A much changed Mother Earth will still live on, but without its perverse, destructive child. Between my sophomore and junior years in 1970, I spent close to a year in Japan working at Expo 70, the World's Fair there. And this was an amazing experience. It is captured in my second memoir, The Expo Affair. But more importantly, this is when I started writing haiku, which is a form I continue to love because to me it is like painting with words, to capture a vision of nature or a feeling one has. Many of my haiku are focused on environmental issues, and I've already read a couple, but I'd like to read a few more. Here's one called When Will Mankind Learn? The earth cries for us, the callous ones who trash it. We will not survive. Sorry, that was another one. Here is the one I wanted to read. It's in the other volume. Okay, when will mankind learn? We keep polluting. Storms, floods, and fires blight our earth. When will mankind learn? And now one called The Man in the Moon. The man in the moon sees the smog clogging our air. He laments our fate. And just one more haiku. It's called We Plunder the Seas. Uncaring stewards, we plunder the seas for fish, unsustainably. And I also delved into another form in Japan, the tanka. And here's a tanka called Is Our World Ending? Is our world ending? Earth has unleashed a virus to punish mankind. The wanton depravity of our Ponzi consumption degrades the natural world. So you can say a lot with very few words in those Japanese forms, and that's partly why I like them. So after my formative years at Harvard, I continued the gypsy life, even once I married Marcia and had children. This was facilitated by a career in international finance, which took us to London, Frankfurt, Toronto, Montreal, and New York. And once I left and went out on my own, back to Budapest, Vienna, Montevideo, and Bordeaux, before more or less settling in Vermont. Along the way, I helped several environmentally focused firms get started. Notably in Budapest, I worked with a couple of youngsters to get a carbon trading operation going. And this was taking off in Europe at the time. And then in Vienna, with a lovely young lady at its head, a renewable energy project development firm that has become since a major player in solar projects throughout Central and Eastern Europe and Russia. And with a couple of Canadian investor friends, we started a renewable energy project developer and power company out of Toronto, which has significant project holdings now in Asia and Africa and has done work in North and South America as well. I continue to be involved with these firms, and that's another way to try and work with the environment for me. But back to my poetry. Living in Vienna was a wonderful experience for us. And here are a few poems which were inspired by music and art in that former imperial capital. And they highlight a particular aspect of the devastation our lifestyle is causing or may result in. The first one I'd like to read was inspired by a New Year's Eve concert in Vienna. The Wiener Philharmonic plays every New Year's Eve. Basically Viennese music, a lot of waltzes. And this was inspired by a Strauss waltz called Wo die Zitronen blühen, or Where the Lemons Blossom. So wrong book again. Here it is. Where the lemons blossom, wo die Zitronen blühen. Lemons still blossom, and not just in Italy. They thrive in Assam, in Burma, and Persia, as well in California and Florida. You can hear Strauss's Wo die Zitronen blühen waltz today on your iPhone anywhere in the world, or read the novel by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, his masterpiece, Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. You can delight in Manet's exquisite still life, Le Citron, painted in 1880. But will lemons, will anything still bloom anywhere when man-caused climate change ravages this planet? Will we be around to appreciate this fruit, so perfect, its blossom's beauty, its taste tartness, and the wonder of the sublime art it inspired? Another poem with a Viennese flavor to it, inspired by a beautiful painting by Albrecht Dürer, which hangs in the Albertina, called The Young Hare. So this poem is called The Hare. Albrecht Dürer's perfect young hare has lived more than 500 years, admired in royal collections, and now in the Albertina, it survives with our loving care. But hares evolved on Earth more than 50 million years ago. Will Dürer's depiction outlast them and us as we drive most life to unrepentant extinction? What irony if this painting outlives the creature it depicts, with no one left to admire it? Another poem with the same flavor to it of underlying culture and what we're doing to it. When we are no longer, who will appreciate what we have created? All the works of mankind, the beauty of our art, the science, the knowledge, and insight in our books, the ferment of our minds, the valor of our spirit. Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Vermeer and Da Vinci, Galileo, Newton, Darwin, and Aristotle will all be forgotten, and the earth will live on, rid of the one species, this Homo sapiens, the destroyer of all. And here's one of my hitherto unpublished poems, which will go into Poems for Our World. Send an SOS out into space. Send an SOS out into space. There might be intelligent life out there in this vast universe. Please come save us, you aliens. Please save our worthwhile creations, our Mona Lisa and Hamlet, Bach, sublime solo cello suites, our scant scientific knowledge, which no doubt just pales beside yours. Alien friends, have pity on us, miserable human beings, this fallible living species that has destroyed its planet. Please come save us, you aliens. So a few years ago, to do some research for my thrillers, I went to Iceland and Greenland with my son, Nicholas. I'm very pleased that perhaps that trip and my other environmental pursuits may have helped shape my son's interest in the environment too. Nicholas now works with a fund that finances renewable energy projects throughout Africa and is passionately committed to sustainability. My daughter, Alexandra, is a psychologist in San Francisco who deals with some of the trauma caused by climate change issues. I'm proud of both of them. As we have seen with Greta Thunberg and others, it is this next generation and the one after that that are the world's hope now. And here are a couple of poems to highlight this. First one called, I'm Sorry, My Son. I am sorry, my son. Part 1. I'm sorry, my son, we have left you a mess. We have befouled the air, we have sullied the land, we have warmed the oceans, burning fossil fuels, heating the atmosphere, melting the polar ice. I am sorry, my son, we have left you a mess. We have changed the climate, the forests are on fire, hurricanes are raging, flooding becomes rampant, islands just disappear, drought kills our crops and us. I am sorry, my son, we have left you a mess. We have left you no time to correct the damage. No path to change the course. Alla jacta est. The tipping point is past. We will become extinct. Part 2. I am sorry, my son. We have left you a mess. Find another planet to begin life again, with new and wiser ways. Save yourselves, your children. Save what remains of life and leave us to perish. I am sorry, my son. We have left you a mess. We are the guilty ones. And here's a poem called Listen to Our Children. Listen to our children who plead for their future. They protest in the streets and clamor for action, for our inept leaders to address climate change and stop taking money from fossil fuel firms, those greedy producers of vile greenhouse gases that despoil our one world and drive species extinct. Listen to our children who plead for their future. So I mentioned Nicholas, and my wife and I have visited him and his little family several times in Kenya. And we hope to be going again in April, COVID permitting. And here's just a little poem I wrote on one of these visits after a wonderful safari to Lewa Downs, where the last few black rhinos are nurtured in a nature conservancy. It's called The Black Rhinoceros. Oops. The other volume again. Here it is. The Black Rhinoceros, after safari at Lewa Downs, Kenya. The black rhinoceros is a bizarre old beast. The crash of them on the move is a fearful sight. Loose folds of leathery skin, wrinkled and dirt-caked, sheathe that prodigious, sagging, brawny old physique, barely held off the ground by those stocky pillars. The ungulate's keen schnozzle smells you from afar. The floppy ears perk up to catch the faintest sound. Those half-blind peepers vainly strain to seek you out. Two slender, tapered sabers protrude from the snout, horns worth more than gold to poachers from East Asia, who butcher these splendid endangered animals and leave their carcasses to rot in the hot sun, like other magnificent species on this earth. We have driven this creature close to extinction. So, and that brings me to what I call my beastie poems, which glorify some of the amazing species on this earth that our actions are endangering now. And these poems are spread throughout my 5 volumes of poetry. And indeed, I've already read some of them, but here are just a couple more. One called Evening Heron and Pond from Cello Stairs, my very first volume. And it captures an evening in Vermont at our place. Evening, heron and pond. Dusk, silence. A gray heron skates gracefully over the pond. A blade slicing the oil fleck, shimmering through the tarry green forest greens. A violent flutter of pterodactyl wings. The bird evolves into a receding silhouette against the polyphonic sky. Vermilion and indigo, aquamarine and burnt orange, and vanishes as the sun bleeds to death. And a poem from Extinction that captures a moment on our back door. It's called The Dragonfly. I found a dragonfly lazing on our screen door, a great blue skimmer spreading its filigree wings, flaunting its dazzling long lapis abdomen, soaking up the warming rays of the noonday sun, oblivious to its Jurassic ancestry. I wonder, will my friend's descendants still be here 150 million years from now, as we disrupt the equilibrium of Earth, insect outliving cocky Homo sapiens, the destructive devil of the Anthropocene. And a newer poem, which focuses on how we are destroying life forms in the seas, here specifically corals. It's called, What Color Was Coral? What color was coral, now all bleached white? Multi-hued it was once, before the oceans warmed and turned more acidic. From all that CO2 we spew into the air, expelling the algae living in its polyps in symbiotic love. The algae turned toxic. The coral reefs wither. Nature is diminished and beauty is destroyed. We have done it again. And that brings me back to examples of the devastation caused by climate change. You are aware of all the wildfires in California and elsewhere, no doubt. And a couple of years ago, there was one in Northern California that just burned much of the forest there, and including a beautiful little town, Paradise. And the poem is called Paradise, California, in memory of the people that died there. Paradise, California. Paradise, California, hellfires rage out of control. The wind whips flames from tree to tree, from bush to bush, from house to house, spreading the scorching inferno, its poisonous smoke far and wide. The fire consumes all in its path. Homes, towns turn to ash and rubble. Trucks and cars melt into liquid. Humans and animals dissolve in fractions of nanoseconds into oxygen and carbon, some hydrogen and nitrogen, and a few other elements. Toxic fumes float over countries, making mere breathing difficult, contaminating and killing the living things they penetrate. Many hundreds burn to charcoal, their screams echoing through the night. For weeks, thousands remain missing. Then the numbers of dead go up and keep ratcheting up and up. The searing grief of survivors bursts in a crescendo of tears. The hellish horror of it all. And another kind of horror caused by climate change, or certainly made worse by it, it's called a hurricane. A hurricane lashes the low-lying island with unrelenting, punishing ferocity. Violent winds tear up trees, rip apart buildings. The tidal surge rises, a giant sea monster that invades the land, washing everything away. Man and his creations, all fruits of evolution. And when the storm passes, devastation remains. The sun shines only on carrion and corpses, remnants of lives, of homes, of cities, of forests. A frying pan, a soggy book, a doll's torso, maybe a roof tile and a twisted vehicle, fallen streetlights, broken windows, an unpaired boot. Then, with lots of tears, the cleanup and rebuild start until the next cyclone comes to chastise us again. Another little poem called Frolicking Flames. The frolicking flames of hellfire devour our primeval forests. We burn filthy fossil fuels, spewing into the air gases that trap the sun's heat, warming Earth, causing drought that scorches the land and melting the polar ice cap, Sea levels rise, flooding our towns, eroding beaches, wasting floodplains. We are destroying Mother Earth and much of life that lives on it, including our conceited selves. And of course, the ultimate threat, extinction, the title of this book, and I'll read the poem that gives it the title, called Extinction. I can picture the mighty mastodon, the towering, ivoried, hairy beast that ruled and roamed this primeval earth. The fierce dinosaurs of the Jurassic, those huge cold-blooded reptilian beasts battling each other for primacy. Through the microscope of my failing mind, in the imagined black hole of creation, I see tiny single-celled organisms, the chemical precursors to all life. I ask, when humankind is no longer, who or what will conceive this strange being, the destroyed earth, and all life, including itself, as if it had been preordained? And now from my new collection, a poem called Satanic Wolves. Satanic wolves cavort on my mother, gnaw at her flesh, drink of her blood, hoofs prancing wildly on Gaia. The witch's cauldron of human waste, the debris of a warmed up world, empties on her ailing corpus. Can we still save our Mother Earth? Or will she perish with mankind? We're getting there, so just a few more. I'd like to read. I'd like to reference a sweeping UN report, which already in 2019 said that 1 million or so of the 8 million plant and animal species on Earth are at risk of extinction in the next few decades. So this is the question: how many species will survive? I ask in this poem. How many species will survive? How many species will survive the destruction we have unleashed on our planet's ecosystems? China builds coal-fired power plants, India too, despite bad air. We cannot stop powering our lives by burning fossil fuels. In Brazil, the Amazon burns. Drought devastates Australia and other regions of the world. The polar ice cap is melting. Violent storms, wind and rain are causing sea levels to rise, flooding our coastal cities, our fragile shore ecosystems. As harvests fail, food becomes scarce. Potable water is poisoned with agricultural runoff and corporate chemical spills. We must step back and change our ways. We must give first priority to the health of our Mother Earth. So just one last poem that captures the current reality before we open the floor up for discussion and questions. This last poem is called Homo Post-Coronavirus. We are all premature corpses. Death masks now cover our faces as we walk around like zombies, not touching, feeling, or hugging our fellow ghost-like creatures. We quake with the frigid frisson of fear that we might just crumble into viral dust with the next breath. At night, we return to our tombs of anxiety and terror and wake to morbid statistics. Will there be at least one Adam and one Eve who survive this plague, to spawn a new kind of being? One who will treat this world better, not destroy its fellow species, the land, sea, and air all around. A wiser and kinder human. Homo post-coronavirus. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm sorry about the few stutters. And now I'm happy to answer questions. So please fire at me, or let's have some discussion about some of the things I try to bring to your attention. Hello?
Hello, Geza.
Yes, hi.
I've got a question
Hi, John.
for you.
Yes, thank you.
Powerful poetry. What kinds of conversations do you have with your son, who is working hard in Africa to bring about a more sustainable world? Does he hear the despair or doom in your poetry and writing? What kind of conversations do you have with your son?
Well, I think we have very down-to-earth conversations, and he sees the desperate situation we are in, but he's trying to do something about it by working in that field and actually bringing clean energy to communities around Africa with the projects that he and his fund finances. And I think it's very wonderful that he's doing it and doing that kind of work. But yes, he is very concerned that things are not going in the right direction. Even now, we're not doing enough as a species to combat climate change. And politically, where we're stymied in many countries and prevented from moving forward, doing the right thing.
So I just one follow-up. So does he believe that if we don't get our greenhouse gases down to 50% by 2030, then there's no way we'll stick with 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Right. I mean, yes,
operating with that same sense of urgency?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. I mean, those are numbers, targets that we're working around, but yes, he certainly has a certain sense of urgency around it, and he communicates it to his colleagues, to people around him all the time. And that's partly where I get my sense of urgency from talking to him about it. And certainly in Africa, I mean, the situation is in many places it's desperate. I mean, there are huge droughts now in northern Kenya and southern Sudan. There are huge famines because people don't have, the agriculture doesn't work there anymore. The plants cannot grow in the totally dry soil. So yes, it's a desperate situation in many ways. Anybody else would like to raise an issue or question? Yes.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Now we can. Yes, good. Thank you.
You mentioned Greenland.
Yes.
I remember reading an article in National Geographic that 500 years ago was the cutoff where, because of the advancing ice age, the people of Greenland could no longer grow vegetables, especially root vegetables. And since that time in between, they've had to import all their food. Now they were celebrating the fact that because of a warmer climate, they could finally again grow root vegetables. Then you go sort of farther west to the Vikings. We had Vikings overrunning Europe and Great Britain and so on, because it was too cold for them to exist in the northern climates. But this also goes back about 500 years. So I guess the big question is, how much of this cycle is inevitable, to which we are adding? And we can't fix naturally occurring phenomena. And what can we as individuals do except group our errands together and not run as many cars as we do?
Well, yes, you're right that there are natural cycles and there's a natural warming and cooling of the climate at various times. But certainly it's scientifically been proven, and there's very little room to argue with it, that the burning of fossil fuels and the greenhouse gases, methane and others as well, that we spew into the atmosphere with our lifestyle, because of our lifestyle, has certainly speeded the warming up drastically. And yes, I mean, there are some, you mentioned that Greenland was partly because of warming, was able to grow potatoes and other tubers and other plants. That there are some beneficial aspects to it, but very, very few. I mean, the melting of the permafrost in Greenland is destabilizing many of the villages there, and the melting of the sea ice is preventing them from doing their normal hunts. So their traditional lifestyles are being disrupted. I mean, I don't know if you've been following, but I do quite a bit of research on this because of my thrillers in Siberia. The melting of the permafrost has had a devastating impact on towns and villages that are around the Arctic Ocean there. And in fact, I mean, Putin and his government has put in 13 military bases there, and they are also being destabilized. So it's very difficult to live with that kind of permafrost melting. And of course, then that adds further to the emission of fossil fuels, because all the methane is being released that's captured in permafrost is being released. And it's getting worse because this past season, the forest fires, and not just the forest fires, but also the taiga in Siberia was burning, much of it. And much more so than anywhere else in the world. There were these fires that were caused by climate change, but also make it a lot worse. So, it's very difficult to argue that we shouldn't be doing everything we can to stop these trends. And I certainly don't think that the warming of the atmosphere would be anywhere near as rapid as it is now, were it not for our spewing of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and the warming that is happening as a result of that, the greenhouse effect. Because basically the way the greenhouse effect, and this is what Roger Revelle taught me way back when, works, is that the heat from the sun is captured by, like in the greenhouse, so it becomes a lot warmer because of those gases than it would be without it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess my view is that we have to do everything we can to counter these trends. And I mean, the problem is that at the political level, there is not clear commitment to it. Certainly in this country, it's very difficult to get anything done on climate change. And that's true of other countries as well. Not enough is being done worldwide. And countries like China, which is one of the major emitters of greenhouse gases, they're just, they may talk a good show at the top level, but at the same time, at the provincial level, they're still putting up coal-fired power plants in the provinces. It's ridiculous. So that's partly why my pessimism is, looking around the world. We're not doing enough. We can't do enough. Right. Anybody else have any comment? Yes, Tim.
I have I sat in, this was probably in the early 70s, a course in a now extinct college in Putney, Vermont. And the fellow, the biologist who was teaching the course, was saying at the time that, that in the past, and of course, he wasn't thinking of, climate change at the time, but in the past, it seems as though mankind has been able to, right at the brink of certain things, find the technology to solve the current problem. And he gave as an example that this fellow who had calculated that 19th century London was doomed to be 12 feet in horse manure if things kept on the way they were. And at that point, the gasoline engine and the automobile had, was invented, and bingo, all of a sudden, London did not end up in 12 feet of horse manure. You don't happen to see anything like that in the horizon in our particular plight, do you?
No, I can't see anything like that would so suddenly be a game changer in the right direction. There are certainly some. I mean, there's some talk of some things, but I think they're far from fruition, and which would be things like shooting something up in the atmosphere that would somehow cool the earth. I'm not a scientist, so I don't quite understand, but certainly they're pie in the sky as far as I'm concerned.
I'd like to comment on
Sure.
that.
Sure.
One of my favorite thoughts is never underestimate Yankee ingenuity. You put enough profit motive behind some amazing thing,
right,
and somebody will come up with something. I mean, look at the last 100 years, like fluoride for teeth, and all the cancer research that's been done because somebody just beat the drum hard enough. So, and I think it's someone like you, Geza, who is sounding the alarm, and it just echoes through everybody's thinking, so that somebody finally comes and says, hey, we can do this, and there's some profit incentive in this. And that's
no, I mean, I hear you, and I would like that to happen, but
we'll keep the faith.
But is it right for us as a species to put all our eggs in that basket, that somebody will come through and come up with some kind of a technology or gizmo that will change that course, and also to generate enough of a profit motive, you have to have also the political side swing in the right direction to allow that and to encourage that. And I don't see that happening, unfortunately. Everybody's out there to make a buck in whatever way possible, as opposed to saying, I will try and create something worthwhile like this that might do something for humanity and hopefully make some money out of it. I think somehow the constellation is not right in my thinking. I mean, yes, you have the technological gurus like Elon Musk and Tesla out there who hopefully will come up with something. But do I want to put all my eggs in that basket? No, I mean, I think we still have to plod along at the micro level and do everything we can.
Geza, if I could just chip in here.
Yes, John, please.
There was a 1917 Harvard College student named Buckminster Fuller who got thrown out his freshman year.
Right.
And as you know, Bucky went on to do some amazing things. I got to hear him speak at Harvard Law School in 1975.
Right.
And someone asked him, they said, Bucky, when you were at the University of Illinois Carbondale in the late 1960s, you got very depressed. You thought that he was doing a world resource inventory. And he calculated, much like the gentleman who calculated calculated there would be 12 feet of horse manure. Bucky calculated that we're going to run out of tungsten and all these titanium and all these really important minerals. Got very depressed. And then somebody said, well, what are you going to do about it? What do you think? And he said, he had this epiphany a month later. And he said, I'm forgetting the concept of synergy and human creativity. So fast forward to 2022, there's a woman named Jane Goodall who just came out with a book called Hope. And in there, someone asked her, like, well, Jane, you've seen the destruction of all the habitats around the Gombe chimp reservation in Tanzania. Why do you have hope? And she said there are 4 reasons. 1, human intellect. 2, the resilience of nature. 3, the power of youth. And 4, the indomitable human spirit. So she launched a program called Roots and Shoots to go to the 4 African nations that surround the Gombe reservation. And she did what your son's doing, which is set up economic development programs called Roots and Shoots. And now that program is in 71 countries all over the world. And it's youth, it's our daughters and sons who are doing this work, who realize, hey, you can't trash nature and expect these chimpanzees to have a place to live. But it's an incredible story that she tells over and over. And so that gives me hope, and
and the more such initiatives we can get going and help. I mean, you're right to a certain extent that it's all about financing to a certain extent, and so if we can help people with ideas like that get going, and that's why I got involved with these 3 renewable energy companies, is to get them to do something about it and put a little bit of money behind them, and they're worldwide now, which is great. But I think we need a lot more of those to turn the ship around. When I look at what's happening at right now at both the poles, I mean, I just get blown away by that, the melting that is happening there. And if you face the fact that there's very little we can do about the collapse of the Thwaites Glacier, and that will cause sea level to rise by as much as 10 feet in 10 years time, within 5 to 10 years time. I mean, that to me is such an urgent call out there for us to try and do something. And the entire country of Bangladesh, with 165 million people living there, will be wiped out. It's totally right at sea level, or just a few feet above sea level. And many of the big cities around the world, which are on the coast, will suffer flooding. I mean, I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago, there was a PBS special on the news, and it showed that already now Portland, Maine gets flooded quite regularly, the streets of Portland, Maine. So, it's something that's here and now, and people have to realize that. And that's partly what I'm trying to, I guess that's partly why I'm trying to paint perhaps too pessimistic a picture is what comes through in my poetry. But I think that's the way I'm trying to get people mobilized about this. And yes, there are some optimistic shoots out there, as John, you mentioned, and the work of my son and others. And but we need more of those, many more of those. And we need to turn our politicians onto this much more so than they are focused even now. I know Biden's trying to get this climate change program through with $555 billion, but that would be a good start. But yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Now I can. Now we can.
Of the group that's assembled here, how many of you have kids and grandkids that are going into environmental areas? our grandson is going to be going to Oregon State to study environmental science out where the
Terrific.
trees and all are, and he could go anywhere with his 4-point average and his Eagle Scout badge, but
Terrific.
he's going out there to. So I think this may have hit the kids and the
Yeah.
grandkids already. Because, and another thing, I think since I worked at Penn State years ago in an environmental area, and I think there's a lot more curricula for the kids too, more
Yes.
things to study, there's going to be trickled down. And as far as the rising tide in Portland, you better believe there's some boat makers out there making some money.
Yeah.
I don't
No.
facetious. I'm just trying to cheer you up.
No, it's good, and I'm really glad to hear your grandson's going into this, and it's fabulous. And as you're right that a lot of young people, the message has got to the young people. They know that it's their future we're talking about here. It is they. I mean, we will be gone in 10, 20 years, if but they will still be around. They will be living with this. I mean, I may not even see the sea level rise because of the Thwaites Glacier degradation, but they certainly will live it if it happens. So it's good that they're out there trying to do something about it. They have to.
How about the others? How about the others that are here? Are any of their family members or friends' kids, and how many others are going into this?
I can answer that. I've got a granddaughter who's 25. She lives in Holland, and she's working with an organization in Kenya.
Oh, really?
Helping women. It's not quite climate change, but she is there in Kenya helping women with an NGO to establish business. Mm-hmm. And my son is in England, and he's working with a group that is doing renewable energy in their little area in Devon.
Terrific.
There you go.
Terrific.
So,
that's great.
Yes.
Fabulous. Terrific. Good.
But I just wish we knew, somebody mentioned we could stop driving our cars less, but I sometimes, I don't know, I switch all the lights off all the time wherever I go, blah, blah, blah.
Me too.
But then I go into New York City and I think, what am I doing? You know?
Yeah.
Nothing I do is going to make any difference. So it's a bit disheartening.
Yeah, but if everybody tries to do whatever they can, and as you say, inspire others, and I know John's doing a lot, but maybe you want to mention a few of the things you're involved in, John.
We have two daughters, one ages 22 and 24, and the 22-year-old has been working in northern Minnesota with the indigenous tribes Canoe Collective, which is trying to stop Line 3, which is a pipeline from Canada running through Native American reservations. And like Geza's daughter, we have a daughter who's studying psychology, very concerned about eco-anxiety. Because this is the Harvard Institute of Politics did a study of youth in America, ages 15 to 29, and 25% of them are either depressed or very, very anxious about everything from COVID to climate change to nuclear war. So we've got a whole generation that I think we have to help cope with what's going on. Very, very. Geza and I are both classmates, and we're both working on projects with our classmates, 30 of whom are doing climate change work. So fixing food, for example, or electrifying the grid, or like what Geza's doing with solar. In the background here is a project I've worked on for 13 years, which is we restored a 57-acre organic farm. And we now have solar collectors covering the barn and the farmer's house. And we have a CSA and 300 people. So, this is happening all over the country. And I'm also very anxious about what we're going to do between now and 2030. 30, but I do think youth. I think
It's the future,
gotta-
yeah.
It's gotta be, and these kids aren't gonna give up.
Yeah, no, it's these grassroots efforts by the youth that are going to make the difference, and hopefully it'll be enough to stave off what I'm talking about. But you never know. I mean, I know that I'm painting a very pessimistic picture, but that's partly for poetic effect. Anyways, thank you all for being here and for listening
Thank you.
to this presentation.
great.
And
Yeah,
thank you
very much.
Michelle, for hosting it again. And I
Thank
hope
you.
to see you all again at some
Mhm.
event. And
Okay.
Thanks
great.
very much, Geza. Nice
Thank
to
Thank
you.
you.
I enjoyed you. Enjoyed
Okay.
the poetry.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. All the best.
Everyone,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.